said something last time about recording. Last time about heads up. I don't know if you guys remember. Okay, call the roll, Mrs. Ford.
Yes, sir. Chairman Wingate.
Here.
Vice Chairman Smith.
Here.
Dr. Hollander.
Here.
Mrs. Hill.
Here.
Mrs. Jones. Mrs. Lennon.
Here.
Mr. McClendon.
Here.
Mrs. Robinson. Mrs. Thurman.
Here.
Mr. Taylor. Superintendent Dr. Johnson.
Here.
All right. Do I have a motion to approve tonight's agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, Mrs. Ford.
Yes.
Mr. McClendon.
Yes.
Yes.
Mrs. Robinson.
Yes.
Mr. Smith.
Yes.
Mrs. Thurman.
Yes.
Chairman Wingate.
About this as we get going on. Obviously, last week we voted to postpone a week on this vote of this fiscal year, and my intent. I know that there was much discussion about that, but my intent was just in deference to the fact that our commission was going to be having a budget discussion on Wednesday, which would have been yesterday, and again in deference to what they may have been able to shed light on before we got ready to pass our budget. We voted to postpone that a week, and so as we get ready here tonight, I think Dr. Johnson and his team will have a recommendation for us, and I think this recommendation will be something that, in light of kind of the times that we find ourselves in and the uncertainty that we find ourselves in, there'll be time for discussion around this proposal and consideration of that. So before we get into any discussion about that, do we have a motion to approve the request of the budget tonight?
Question.
Can you?
May I ask a
Yes.
question?
Can you? Sure.
Yes. Are there any adaptations or any changes to what was presented before?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll need to know the changes before.
Yes.
Right?
That's true. That is correct. Thank you, sir. I'm glad you said that. So let's Dr. Johnson or Mr. Goldberg, would you guys go ahead and start?
You'll share my screen here. Maybe. You all see that? As Chairman Wingate said, let me use the arrows. As Chairman Wingate said, we start looking at our budget. Kind of take through the timeline here. Several requests from the board. So just kind of where we are now, and kind of talk through this timeline. Obviously we're dealing with COVID-19, and had our initial budget workshop on the 30th. We're able to present the entire budget and all the pieces and parts to it. April 2nd through 9th, we were able to have individual meetings with you all about follow-up questions that you may have, or concerns, or shifts. On April the 20th, had an agenda meeting and a budget workshop. And that was another situation where we had to bump it another week due to the tornadoes that hit the East Brainerd and Ooltewah areas. And then on the 23rd, we were scheduled for a budget vote. There was a request, as Chairman Wingate mentioned, to move it to after to this week, until after the county commission had an opportunity. And thought maybe I think Dr. Hollander mentioned there would maybe some kind of resolution or some guidance coming that we were definitely looking forward to. The motion passed to table it, and so we're to provide, requested revised budget, as several of you have requested. So obviously the COVID-19 budget impact, it does potentially create widespread challenges that may require significant cuts. What we continue to learn is that county government is holding property and sales tax at fiscal year 20 levels within their budget, and Brent will chime in here kind of as we roll. And so, Brent, you want to talk a little bit about the county government holding property and sales tax at fiscal year 20 levels?
Yeah, so just for a little context, before we presented the budget to the board on March 30th, and then even last week, our conversations with the county had property tax growth at 2.5%, which is what we were also using for growth. And then the county did decide to change their projections to no growth for property taxes. And then also for sales tax, the sales tax in the county budget is only a few $1,000,000, because they only get half the sales tax for the sales generated in the unincorporated portions of the county. The cities get the lion's share of the sales tax, other than the schools. So while they are holding their sales tax at fiscal year 20 levels, even if it all went away, it wouldn't impact their budget that much. Whereas for the school system, it's a larger portion of our budget, and you'll see that we have gone a little bit further on sales tax than what the county is doing.
So in this requested revised fiscal year 21 budget, and at the end, we will present both proposals, and you all as a board decide which route you want us to head in. But to eliminate the new revenue budgeted, except for the governor's BP increase, and to cut sales tax and hold property tax flat. In that request, it would require a freeze of all employee step increases, some cuts, at least 2 directors within learning communities at the central office level, a freeze of all non-teacher hiring and purchasing through June 30th. It will require a hold on the custodial RFP. There are savings to be had, and I'll talk through some of these numbers, and a hold on the maintenance vehicle leasing that was going to potentially have some cost savings. So I'll actually let Brent speak to numbers of kind of each of those in the rundown. Then the biggest piece is putting $1 million into the rainy day fund. So Brent, you want to talk numbers on those a little bit?
So I'll start with the top. The employee step increase is $2.8 million is what we had in the budget for that. So if we freeze employee step increases now, then that would initially save $2.8 million. The cuts to central office would be somewhere around $300,000, and then by holding the custodial RFP, that's $600,000 we could cut out of the proposed budget. Essentially delay that until a later time, and then budget those funds. And then holding the maintenance vehicle leasing would save $330,000 from the proposed budget. And then freezing all non-teacher hiring and purchasing through June 30th. It's hard to put a number on that, but what we do know is that it would save us money between now and the end of this fiscal year, as we go into the next fiscal year, and it would just put us in a more conservative position.
I do want to be clear about the cuts to central office so you all know if this is the budget that's selected by the board to be approved. We will have to reconfigure learning community some, and we'll work through that. Neely and her team would absolutely work through that, but want you to be aware that there would be some reconfiguration required from an org structure standpoint. Brent, I'll let you roll here with numbers.
Yeah, so this is a view of the proposed revenue. Just to go back to what the budget was for fiscal year 20, the original budget was a total of 410 million. We did amend the budget in February to add $3 million. That was based on the increased collection that were happening through February, and our original proposed fiscal year 21 budget was 420 million. So you can see here that what this does is it cuts that down to 417 million, which holds property tax flat, and it actually decreases sales tax by 1.8 million when you compare the new proposal to the amended budget. And then you'll see the only increases is the BEP increase, that's the amount that we've received from the state. We got a notice last week that would be the BEP growth. And then we've got some direct federal revenues that would increase slightly. So overall, you're looking at just under a $4 million increase between this new proposal and the amended fiscal year 20 budget. Again, that's increased state revenues and decreased sales tax nets out to that number. And then just a little context around that. So one thing that we've heard is that we should hold our budget exactly what it was for fiscal year 20, and that $410 million number has been used. One issue of that is the state law regarding maintenance of effort. So we are not allowed to supplant increase in state funds by decreasing local government funds. So the funds that have come in from the growth in BEP, we can't change our budget back down to 410. We have to at least have that 5 million in there that's been given to us by the state. So essentially what the maintenance of effort means is local support for public schools cannot be reduced unless there's a decline in enrollment or a cut to the state BEP funding. And this year we actually have projected increase in enrollment, and then we've been notified by the state that we actually have an increase in BEP funds.
And so for the board considerations and options, you had the the original proposal that was presented in March, and based on feedback from several of you, the requested revised fiscal year 21 budget proposal that you've just seen that adjusts the property tax projections and cuts the sales tax projections. And so those are the options that are there, and want to leave it to you all at this point.
Caritza, Mrs. Jones.
I just wanted to see if Brent or Dr. Johnson, I think it was Brent who did that, if he can go back through the under the new revised FY21, all the cuts. So when it talked about with the freezing and all of that, if he could give those numbers again.
Yep. Right here.
Yeah. So
yeah, that page right there.
Freezing step increases would be 2.8 million.
Okay.
Cuts to central office would be 300,000.
Okay.
And then custodial would be 600,000. And the vehicles would be 330,000. So that all adds up to about $4 million, right at $4 million. And the decrease in revenue is 3 million, which would allow us to put $1 million into the rainy day fund on top of the decrease in revenues.
Okay.
All right, Dr. Hollander.
On the freezing employee step increases, are these the new step increases that we have adopted, or are these the ones that the state has? step
When,
increase.
when you say the state has, I don't,
You know, we have the state scale for step increases, right?
we're well above the state salary schedule, well
Yeah.
above.
As long as we're not, I guess that's what I was alluding to. As long as we're staying well above the state scale, right?
Yes.
Yeah, these would be, so essentially what this would do is typically in July 1st, employees would gain a step on the scale and that ranges from anywhere from a $300 a year increase to say a $1,200 a year increase, depending on where you are on the scale. This would freeze that as of July 1st. So what that means is employees' paychecks in July would be the same as they are now. So it preserves the pay that employees have now. It just freezes the increases until we get further down the road to a point where we could reevaluate.
And it would automatically come back next year, or would we have to vote it back?
So typically the first thing we fund is step increases when we present a budget. So for fiscal year 22, that would be the first thing that we propose to fund with any growth, whether it's state or local. So yes, and then, if we get to the point, if we get, for example, if in June when we get revenue reports, and it looks like the economic conditions are changing favorably, we may decide to come back to the board and request to reinstate these step increases. And we would evaluate that monthly starting June 20th to see if that's something, that we would like the board to consider if revenue projections look like they're going to be higher than what we have.
Could I ask one other question?
Okay.
Well, all the 7,000 that we're getting above the 410 that we got last year, that is all from exterior sources, state or federal, right?
The 7 million, not 7,000, right, Coach?
I mean, I said 1,000. I meant million. Yeah, you're right. 7 million. I'm not a big wheel like some of you guys.
Yeah. Well,
but so that's all from outside the county. Is that correct?
yeah, I think part of the issue, yes, the vast majority of it is, I believe, 5 million of it, 5.5 million or so, and there's some other pieces and funds in there. This apples to, the apples to apples comparison of a budget year over year. That's why that maintenance of effort piece comes into the fold.
I know where the county is required to give us the same amount. Would this change the amount that they're required to give us next year? Maybe is that a question or a Brent question?
Yeah, I mean, this would maintain our current local taxes where they essentially, our local taxes from the county would stay the same for fiscal year 21 as they do for fiscal year 20. So it would not change the amount that they're required to give us going forward.
Okay. Thank you.
It just stays the same.
Mrs. Robinson.
Okay, I've got a few questions. I've got two logistical questions on this proposal. So the first, I just want to better understand the cut to central office. Does that mean that these people would have their jobs until the new budget cycle starts, or are these positions that we have not actually hired yet? I just want to trying to clarify. Are these people currently hired?
They're currently employed in our district.
Okay.
They're directors, and they would be, we've frozen in essence principalships and such, and so we would have some shifting to do.
Okay. So in theory, we wouldn't these people wouldn't lose their job. Wouldn't be without a job. They just may not be in their current.
Yeah, they
job.
wouldn't be without a job. Yeah, they wouldn't be without a job. They just wouldn't be in their current roles.
Okay. I'm asking this because I just want to fully understand the weight of what we're talking about. So I'm really not trying to put anybody on the spot or.
Yeah. No, it's a fair question. And one in which we're still navigating in regards to, the who and the what and the where. And if the board selected this option, it's the school system's budget. We are here to, we obviously have to respond to the fiscal, the economic environment. And obviously this request was there for us to look at it in this way. And so these are the options that, kind of come to top of the charts.
Okay. All right. And that's a total of 300,000. Is that correct? Those two, it's two
With
positions.
salary and benefits, and
Yeah.
we work it out, and those are round numbers.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So if we vote on this tonight, when do those people get notice and lose their jobs?
So let me be clear. It would sound a little bit lost. So if you vote on this tonight, we would start pretty immediately. I've already met with potentially impacted group of employees, just out of respect for these are folks that put in a lot of work, and as everybody does, and so it's a heavy it's a heavy weight, right? And that is that weighs heavily on I think everybody, and so these particular folks would have an opportunity to compete. We would be basically reducing the number, and they would have an opportunity to compete for those roles. And then two of them would have to be placed somewhere from the standpoint of principalship or another vacancy that's currently available within the system.
Okay.
And who and where those are, I don't know. And here's the reality in our budget environment, from a guaranteeing of who, what, and where. I mean, you can't, I couldn't guarantee that.
I totally understand. I personally just want to really understand, because I don't take any of this lightly, even with my own company in the middle of this, crisis. I've taken all of this very seriously. So I feel, very much the same about these people as I do even the people that I employ in my professional life. So, okay. So my next question is, I just want to understand holding the custodial RFP. Brent, can you tell me more about how holding this saves us $600,000? I don't think I understand the logistics of how that works.
And Justin may want to add to this, but when we looked at doing an RFP for custodial, one thing that we do know is that the current prices in the contract are from 10 years ago. So this is a very old contract that we've had small escalations each year. Our estimate is by doing an RFP, and as part of the RFP, asking that they have employees that are paid at a wage that would give us more consistency and all those things to help with some of the issues that we've had, and then just the cost of labor and supplies in general. Our belief is that the price would go up on the contract. So the contract we currently have in place, we believe it would increase, fairly significantly if we do an RFP, and we're paying employees, or they are paying their employees a higher wage to reduce turnover, increase consistency of work, and those sorts of things. So Justin may want to add to that, but all of our estimates show that doing an RFP would increase the cost of our custodian.
Okay. So you're expecting them to maybe do a month-to-month contract if we pass on this budget? Is that what I'm understanding?
Ms. Robinson, I spoke to the vice president of ABM today, and they would be willing to go through the end of the fiscal year. So basically right now we're in contract with them through the end of December. And if this is approved tonight, we'd enter into a contract through the end of the fiscal year.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay, my final question is, do we know anything more about how the COVID federal dollars, the disaster relief dollars, will impact our system, and then how it ultimately impacts the 2021 budget? I'm not as familiar with the logistics of these dollars, but I am under the impression that President Trump is allocating, a certain amount of money to states to then divvy up to their local school systems, and that we are expecting to receive some of these dollars. Is that accurate?
Absolutely. So we will absolutely be receiving some of those dollars, and some of those dollars will help fill some of the gaps, whether it be student technology and Wi-Fi access, summer programming, any summer programming we're able to offer, any extension of, class time on either side, and compensation for employees, teachers in particular, to do some of those things. It'll support us with training and some of those kinds of areas where there just frankly are funding gaps, right now.
So right now, those items are funding gaps. There is not an opportunity to move funds around whenever we receive those dollars to then change this slide. Am I accurate in that?
Yeah. So here's, you got two different things you're dealing with. These are recurring budgetary items, right?
That's a good point. Yeah.
And so that's the CARES Act is one time, relief funding, so to speak,
Okay.
and you never really try to fund recurring things with one-time money, but sometimes you're in and that's why we're putting $1 million back in the rainy day fund. In essence, the $1 million that is going into the rainy day fund is really a recurring $1 million, because it's being pulled from a recurring area. And so it's just we just try to be cautious with doing that way. Now, we may get into, a budgetary situation as it goes forward where we're coming to the board saying, we've made this and this and this and this reduction, and, we need to go to fund balance, but we want to try to, be as fiscally responsible as possible in these times.
Okay. And that's a good point, that's a one-time, payment of funds. You're right. And I appreciate you pointing that out. Okay. Okay. And just to be really clear, just to make sure that people watching outside of the board are also really clear on this, this proposal is meant to be moved forward by what date? June 20th? Is that the date that we're looking at for when we have more information from the county?
I think yeah, go ahead, Brent.
So, so property taxes, I'll start with property taxes. The county and this proposal both show no growth in property taxes. That doesn't necessarily mean we anticipate getting less property taxes or not having growth. We're just being more conservative in our budget. So if we do get property taxes, those come in monthly, and we'll see, where that is. But the bulk of those come in, around February when all the taxes are due. For sales tax, which is the more volatile one that we need to watch, on let's see, what is this? On May 20th, we will receive March sales taxes. I don't expect March sales taxes to be that bad because we were still open for the most part in March, except for the last few days of the month, in terms of the economy being open. So I think March sales tax will be fairly even. On June 20th, we get the sales taxes for April. So that's really going to show us how bad our sales tax situation is for April. And then it also, but because it's out in June, we're going to have a better indication of where we are economically, whether we're recovering or, holding flat or whatever, because we'll be almost 2 months into the governor and the mayor's reopening plan. So, June 20th really is the date that'll give us a lot more information. And then that's the first time we will really be able to evaluate where we are.
And hopefully from past practice, one of the things we've been able to do over the last year or so is to be proactive with our budget, and so as we look at revenue, if he sees the trend, I mean, one of the things that I know that, and Keith can probably speak to this better than anybody, you want to talk a little about what the conversation was kind of in collaborative conference in regards to looking at it month over month and that commitment.
Yes, we had a collaborative conference session this afternoon with HCEA, and one of the things that as we talked about is really taking an opportunity to look at the revenue on a month-to-month basis, just to determine, is there going to be a point in time that we'll be able to do something to basically reinstate our step increases. And HCEA was very supportive of that approach, recognizing that they would like to be able to do something for teachers, but also understanding the economic situation that exists and that we're trying to address with this budget.
Well, I'm just curious if we take this approach of freezing and this is what we present to the commission, how does that impact us with actually receiving growth money if there is growth money? I've never been in this situation before, which is why I'm asking. I'm just wondering, does this signal that we don't desire growth money? Does this now does the commission automatically decide to allocate that growth money to something else?
So yeah, that's a good question. So currently, the county has allocated the property taxes in 3 buckets. They have a certain portion that is allocated to education, a certain portion to general government, and a certain portion to roads. And those rates are voted on in a resolution and posted on the trustee's website. So the trustee will continue to send us the property taxes in accordance with that rate allocation. So just like in the past, if you all remember, a few years ago, we received more property taxes than we budgeted because of growth in property taxes that we didn't fully budget. So that's because the trustee was sending us property taxes in accordance with the rate allocation that's in the resolution on record for the allocation of property taxes. So if the county, the only way that would change is if the county were to vote to change the allocation from education to something else.
Okay, thank you.
And then sales taxes are, that's managed by the state. So we get 50% of all sales taxes generated in Hamilton County, including online sales.
Okay, Mrs. Thurman.
Okay, a couple of things. That's you're talking about property tax, and I know that there were like 500 houses now been just taken completely off the roll, and then I don't know how many more are off the roll until they get them repaired. Is that the way that works? I think with the houses.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the taxes are waived until they're rebuilt.
Okay. Yeah. So that's probably going to be. Oh my goodness, probably be Christmas before any of that's even hashed out, I'm sure. Yeah, and I was wondering about the computers that we are, that the kids have all taken home, and the ones, of course, that were destroyed. Of course, I'm sure we had insurance on those. And most of the other ones, I'm supposing that we have insurance on, even if the parents didn't take insurance out on them, because I'm afraid that a lot of these computers are not going to be coming back, and when they come back, they're just not going to be in really good shape, some of them. So what are we doing about trying to replace them? Do we have insurance on them, or are we going to have to replace them? Exactly what's the status for those?
So great question. We've gotten that question the last couple of days with meeting with a large teacher group. So when we made the decision and realized that we're going to go into continued learning, we were fine in grades 9 through 12 because we already had the insurance structure set up. We immediately, Justin and his team, and working with Brent, immediately worked towards the acquisition of additional insurance for devices for students in grades K through 5. And the reason was because we wanted to be able to deploy the devices, to have them. We wanted to get as many of those devices in the hands of students versus have them sitting in schools. And so we did purchase additional insurance. But the other element is that's an area that CARES funding can help us fill the gap. And so, obviously in our I hate to call it a new normal, but in this new environment that we're dealing with in regards to online learning, access to technology, and access to Wi-Fi and the whole gamut becomes, more and more important. So between the insurance and replenishing in that way, and the CARES Act and replenishing in that way, we'll have them covered. The only other thing I'll add, Rhonda, is that a lot of our elementary devices, if there's any, I won't say silver lining, but any other little element that I would add, a lot of our elementary devices are they were in the worst shape, and so our grades 6 through 12 were in the best shape for the most part. And just generally speaking, there may be some pockets in some places. And then in grades K through 5. That's where our oldest devices were as a school system.
Okay. You know, I look at this, and I'm not saying that. I'm always looking if we can cut people. You know, why do we have them? So this one of the questions I have. But so you would rather do some of this than to put off buying the new literacy program, because that's how many million is that? Was that 6 or something like that?
Well, yeah. So here's what I would submit to you all as a board. It's ultimately going to be the board's decision. I want to serve at your direction. So you've got a strategic plan, and one of the areas in the strategic plan that's outlined is literacy, and really doubling the percentage of students that are proficient by 3rd grade, or increasing that percentage to over 50%. The governor has put a heavy investment into literacy. The State Department has made a big focus around high quality instructional materials. And I think one of the most important things we can do in public education is to teach children to be literate. And so, I think it is, and we shared this last week, that, it's not I don't see it as a program. I know it's been framed as maybe been framed as a government program. I think reading is like a foundational expectation of public education, and we've got to get it right, and it's too important not to get it right. And I'll be honest, I understand having hard conversation, hard times, and we brought some hard considerations for you to make in other areas, but I hope that signals how important we feel like it is that children can read. We are a K-12 entity, and we have to teach kids to read.
Well, whether we purchase whether this thing is purchased or not, that's still our job. That's my whole point. I mean, it's not like the kids aren't going to get to read without this new literacy program. But the reason I'm asking is I have been contacted by teachers that are just very concerned that kids are going to be showing up at school already behind, and they're going to be trying to get them caught up, and there's going to be in so much professional development and introducing a new program. Just a lot of those kinds of concerns, and I can understand where they're coming from. And I'm just wondering, with the budget in this situation, if that's really the best thing to do, because if it's a new program and it's started up and everybody's on a different page, that it might not be the best thing anyway. Of course, I know that reading is the most important thing that we do. Without that, nothing else matters. That's always been the case. Yeah. But I know a lot of teachers, and I know they're going to be teaching reading whether we buy a new program or not. They always have been. That's just a question that I have. Is that more important than? And my thing is not necessarily about the trading that for this, but whether we really need to do that and put all that burden on the teachers at the first of the year. That's my biggest concern. But I mean, we've already had that conversation, so it's already been voted on. But I'm just looking at all of this stuff and that as well, and trying to weigh which way would be the smartest. But like I say, the other's already been voted on. So
I will say this, Ron, if there's any styles. So hopefully when you look at what you asked us to go, what kind of board collectively say, go back and look, I think that what we've tried to do with any consideration we bring before you is to have, is to not impact students as little as we can, and so, obviously the step increases. Fortunately, we're able to do the 2.5%, and fortunately, we're able to do it early, in March, and that remains. But whether it's cut to central office, or really looking at non-teacher hiring and purchases, or custodial or maintenance, we've tried to really have as few impacts as possible on on directly on the classroom. And so teacher technology, it's important. It was reiterated to me over the last couple of days. We've got teachers who can't charge devices, yet we're asking them to get material posted online. Student technology will be important. Some of the student technology we'll be able to address through CARES funding, but there are some areas that are important that are directly connected to the classroom that we try to preserve as much as possible.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mrs. Jones.
I was just going to get clarity on the positions in central office, but I I think I understand now, it's 2 director positions. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's correct. And there would have to be most likely a restructure in Neely's org of somewhat of our learning communities, and we try to figure that out.
Okay. All right.
Mrs. Lennon.
I guess when I see freeze all employee step increases, that kind of is a big red flag to me, because of the importance that we have put on great leaders and great teachers. And I think that's kind of, we really have tried hard to make sure that stays a top priority with everything that we do. And that's kind of, I don't understand why that's like number one thing that goes away, is to freeze all step increases. And I don't understand. 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 And I don't information on my end about why why we would need to change it this much based on the information I heard at the meeting yesterday. So maybe, Brent, did you have a different conversation with the finance committee from the commission after the meeting? Because I didn't hear any conversation that went on during that commission meeting that led me to believe that this type of a decision needed to be made.
So a few things. One, I did talk to the county finance office, and they did tell me that they changed their property tax and they changed all their projections from having some growth to no growth. So, I think it's prudent for us to follow that and not show any growth in property taxes. One, it's the same tax base. So and they're much more in tune with property tax projections than we would be, because that's the biggest part of their budget. They don't have state funding and sales tax like we do. So they believe it's prudent to do no growth in property tax. One, I think to be conservative. Two, I think, like Ms. Thurman mentioned about some properties not being on the rolls for a period of time, but also just to be conservative in this environment where we don't really know where we're going to be in a couple of months until we get there and see what the numbers look like. So because they are showing no growth, I think it's probably prudent for us to also show no growth. And then also with the freeze of employee step increases, a couple of the goals that I looked at when going through this budget is, one, to protect as many jobs as possible and keep people employed. I think that's the right thing to do for our employees. And number two, I think it's the right thing to do for the community, because as the second largest employer, the more people we keep employed, the better it is for the local economy. Two, I wanted to make sure that we kept everyone's paycheck where it is now. So the employees would have the same pay in July as they have today. And freezing step increases, in my opinion, is the best way to position the district for recovery once we get a few months down the road and we see where we are with reopening the economy, because it's avoiding future costs now so that we can be more agile in our reaction to recovery when we get to the recovery point.
Okay. And thank you. And my other thing is I kind of want to echo on the RFP for the custodial. I don't agree with you. I don't know how you know that. I don't know why you don't give other people an opportunity to possibly just kind of like give their RFP, and why you just kind of like assume that it's going to be this much more by not even like opening the door to people. But I think you all already have your mind made up. But I would just like to kind of, again, go on the record and saying, I wish with all my heart and soul that you would try to maybe reconsider that and open it back up. Because again, we keep doing it over and over and over again, and continually letting the same people do our custodial cleaning. But That's up to you guys, and you've made that decision.
Mr. Smith. You're on mute, Joe.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a few comments. I want to say first, I'm feeling a little bit of frustration, and probably we all are to some level, but last Thursday night, as I recall, we voted, I think it was 6-3 to not vote on the budget because we wanted to have total respect of our funding body, our commissioners, and felt like that maybe they would have some clear direction for us or ideas for us yesterday. And that just didn't happen. It just didn't happen. They talked some about having a zero growth budget. A couple of them did. I watched the whole thing this afternoon. A couple of them talked about that, but of course they didn't pass any kind of resolution to that effect. That we all look at a zero growth budget. So I'm a little bit, I guess, frustrated that we didn't get more clear direction, because I felt like we as a school board were really trying to respect those guys and really get some clear guidance from them. And it just, in my opinion anyway, and it's just my opinion, we didn't get any clear direction. We heard some talk, some good comments by a couple of those guys that indicated that they wanted a zero growth budget, but I'm just disappointed in that. Just disappointed. Another comment that I would have, and again, just Joe Smith's opinion, it looks like that we have found about, if I'm looking at this right, Brett, jump on me if I'm not, but it looks like we've cut here about $4 million. Is that correct, Brett?
Yes, sir. $4 million in expenses.
Okay, well, just let me say that I don't know how big a sacrifice that is. You know, when we're talking about 420 billion, I don't know. That doesn't sound like a big sacrifice to me. Maybe it is, but it doesn't sound like a real big sacrifice. My question is this, that I just didn't quite understand, because when people talk about a zero growth budget, to me, what that's saying is that our budget ought to be 410 million like it was last year. So if we're saying 417 million, then we're growing 7 million. Just in my simple little math. Let me finish my thought. You referenced just a moment ago in your opening comments, you referenced something about the maintenance of effort, and I'm not real sure I understand exactly what that means. But when I look at a figure of 410 million that we were at last year, and now with these cuts that's been mentioned here, we're going to be at 417 million. Well, that's not zero growth. So help me again to understand what that 7 million is.
So, and Brian, can you go back to the revenue slide? The local taxes is zero growth. Where'd it go? Go one more. There we go. Thank you. So if you look at local taxes, our budget, the portion of the $410 million budget that was local taxes was the $230,600,000.
Yeah.
Then we amended that in February to add $3 million to that. So if you look at the proposed local taxes for 21, it's actually a $1.8 million decrease from the amended budget. So we're actually decreasing local taxes from our most recent budget, and then the growth comes from the governor's BEP funds of 5.4 million. And so the net growth between the amended budget and the proposed budget is 3.8 million. but you're right, it's 7 million compared to the original budget. And the difference is primarily that 3 million that we amended in February.
And Mr. Smith, to clarify that, what Mr. Goldberg was talking about is a state law called maintenance of effort. The General Assembly has said that local governments cannot ride the coattails of the state government and reduce local funding when the state increases the state funding. And so the law requires local governments from year to year to keep providing the same level of funding that they did the previous year. So if you look at that slide right there, in that 1, 2, 3, the fourth column from the left under budget fiscal year 2020,
Yep.
you see $410 million. Well, that's what our budget was, but what we received, as Mr. Goldberg explained, was actually a bit higher than that because revenues came in higher than expected. That's the number that sets our maintenance of effort. It's not what we budgeted last year, it's what we received. And so really what we're doing, as I understand Mr. Goldberg's presentation, is that number is essentially held flat. There's a little bit of a reduction, but it's essentially held flat. The rest of the revenue is coming from the state.
Okay. All right. So I think the bottom line is then with that point, what you just said with the state, we couldn't get to 410 million if we wanted to. That's a question.
That's correct. I mean, the only two ways that you can reduce local funding would be either from a shortfall, a drop in enrollment, or if there is a BEP cut.
Okay.
So you're correct. That 410 number is in the rearview mirror because that was our budgeted receipt last year. What we received was actually greater than that. Maintenance of effort requires the funding body to do the same thing it did the year before. Mr. Goldberg, did I get that right?
Yes.
Now, what do you mean the same thing they did the year before? You mean the same amount?
Same amount, yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, if you don't mind. Hey Joe, I just wanted to point out that basically, like, to put it into perspective, the budget that was originally presented to us was really not, it had really no real significant uptick compared to last year's budget. And so that's why it's really just a $4 million change in this versus what the maintenance of effort basically requires us to receive. So I don't know if that makes any sense, but I didn't know if maybe that would help for you to understand.
Well, I think I got it, but the only way we would get down to that 410 million is we'd have to find someplace else to make additional cuts than what's being proposed here. And I'm not so sure that's the healthy thing to do, but that'd be the only way.
I think because the budget was originally presented as relatively slim, sure, you could argue that it's not slim or you could argue that it is, but in comparison to what I think, probably Dr. Johnson and his team expected to present to us this year, I think they presented a fairly slim budget based on what they probably wanted to present. There's really not a lot of areas to cut unless you start cutting into elements that then really do start to impact students. I think that's important for us to remember in this process.
Yeah. Well, just again, my final comment, just to emphasize, it would have made it much easier, I think, if the commission had been more clear yesterday what they wanted us to do. So I'm finished, Joe. Thank you.
Mrs. Hill.
No, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Joe. So the governor increased funding to the BEP, and he had an intent for how that money would be used. And our delegation voted according to that. What line, and those line items changed as we headed into COVID budget cuts from the state. what line items did the governor increase funding in the BEP?
So, well, first thing I'll say is, because it's always want to make sure
It's
to remind
not
everyone that
funding direction, it's a funding formula, right?
yeah, funding formula, not a spending plan.
Right.
But some of the line increases. So on the notice we received last week, our increase in funding to go toward teacher compensation, for example, is 1.7 million. And we don't have to spend it on teacher compensation as long as we're above a certain place, which we already are. But as you all know, the biggest chunk of our increase of that 7 million, 6.8 of it is teacher pay from the raise that we did in February. But otherwise, it's just general growth of all the components in the BEP plan. There's no specific areas. The specific things that he originally proposed around literacy and mental health were all things that were cut.
Right. Okay. So in the original budget proposal that you all brought to us, that 1.7 million was listed as going to fund the step increases. Though obviously it cost another $1 million to cover that, but that was the intent, to use that money that the governor intended for teachers to go directly into teachers' bank accounts. I think it would be great for us as a board to identify when we think it's raining. And maybe as a county, and even as a state, when did it start raining, or has it? Because we're, taking money that teachers are anticipating receiving in good faith and putting that on the back burner and putting $1 million in our rainy day fund, when for a whole lot of people it's raining, y'all. Rained at my house. I mean, we're not, our teachers aren't islands. They have spouses. That's finances have been significantly impacted by this. It's not something that I take lightly to just say, all right, let's take it off the top right here. I respect, Brent, what you're saying about it being, it positions us for recovery. Versus, stopping a significant effort toward literacy, for example, that doesn't position us for recovery. I appreciate that. But as I look at the line item budget, department by department by department, we have moved toward priority-based budgeting, which I think is absolutely appropriate and helps us make choices that align with our strategic plan. But I also see that in our school board budget, we have $20,000 allotted for travel. Now, I don't know about you guys, but the TSBA convention is less and less useful to me as we become a more sophisticated system. And I know Tucker and I have talked about how it'd be great to be able to go to nationals. Well, okay, so maybe we don't get to do that, but maybe we say, let's make some really small incremental changes in our budget to get to a place where we can absorb this. Because, to Joe Smith's point, $4 million in a $417 million budget is a 1%. And I just wonder, if we look at this really with a fine-tooth comb, there are people out there who've been eating Kraft macaroni and cheese and now they're buying Aldi brand. And Aldi brand's saving them $2 every time they go to the grocery store. And is there anything that we can do to save $2 here and $2 there and be able to maintain this commitment that we made to our teachers last year? Tiffany says, do not knock Aldi. Tiffany, 100% of my shopping is done at Aldi. I'm a huge fan. My grocery budget would make y'all jealous, how low it is. I want us to be very thoughtful, not necessarily very quick, because this board last week decided that we were willing to wait a week And the county commission has indicated that they're ready to wait till July. So, Brian, the thought about reconfiguring our learning communities is a big idea. And I want to know more about that. And I don't know that that's something that we can talk about right now. I think I want to understand, where's the vision for what 3 learning communities versus 5 looks like? How does that help us work toward our strategic plan? How does the rest of the staffing shake out? How are we engaging with our community? What strides have we made that are positive that we are going to sacrifice or be able to do better if we reconfigure that? Certainly, just because we have a staffing model such as it is does not mean that it has to stay that way. Human beings make systems, therefore we can change systems, right? I mean, but I've got to say, I hesitate to move away from a commitment to people that we've made long ago in what feels like a premature move. Because if we had $2 million planned for local property tax growth. So if that's gone, that says to me, all right, well, take it from 420, now we're at 418. Well, where are there places that we can shave here and there? I mean, I think I'm just not convinced that this is the most thoughtful way to do this. And doesn't mean I can't be convinced, but I'm certainly not there yet.
Dr. Hollander. Coach, you're on mute. Coach, you're muted.
Did I get it?
There you go.
Okay, thank you. I agree with a lot of what Ms. Jenny said. I appreciate very much, Brent, what you and Dr. Johnson have done and putting the new program together. You put a lot of work into it. It's hard for me to look at a major budget like this and I do appreciate your work very much, but it's hard to make a decision without time to digest it. I believe that's what Jenny was saying partially, wasn't it, Jenny? That partially that need to digest the whole thing. I mean, we're all for teachers, we're all for kids. I mean, we also look at the huge tax increase. If you look at what Nashville's done, they're having to put in for a huge tax increase. They've requested it. And everyone across the state's anticipating less money. Let me just get a couple of things straight before we had 420 last week, 420 million last week, and now it's 421. How did it go from 420 to 421? I know you said that's just $1 million, but for a country boy, that's a lot of money.
No, so the proposed budget was 420 last week, and now it's 417.
Right, but you took 4 million from the 421. I didn't know how it got to 421.
Well, we might need to pull that slide back up. We had a $420 million proposed budget last week. We cut $3 million in revenue to get to 417. This proposal for the revision cuts $4 million in expenses, so it leaves us with $1 million to put into fund balance.
Okay. Well, the other thing is, let me ask you this. Well, the county cannot give less than they did the year before. So hypothetically, next calendar year, would they be required to give us 417 million?
No, well, so they don't have the control over the BEP portion.
Right. But if the BEP is not the same, you said we increased BEP, say the state and the feds do not give us that money again. Does the county have to pick up the difference and pay, or do they go back to 410?
Yeah, so they just have to maintain the same level of local taxes.
Okay.
They can't decrease local taxes, but if the state decreases funding, not just no growth, but actually decreases funding, then the local portion can also decrease.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Mrs. Thurman.
Okay, just to be clear, we started out with 410 in our budget, and then we ended up with 413 from the county. Correct? That's what we ended up getting from the county. 413.
That includes BEP. So it went from The
Okay.
county went from 230 to 233.
Okay, so that's what I'm saying, extra three, well, yeah, that's where the extra 3 million came from.
Right, from
'Cause it started
local.
out- Okay, from local. Okay,
Yep.
so the commission, I think the commission maybe need to understand that they actually gave us 413 instead of 410 last year. Maybe that's one of the places. And then last year we ended up getting another 3.8 million. What did we use that money for? Was that for reoccurring expenses? Obviously, is that where we hired some new positions or something like that?
No, 3.8 million addition. What do you tell us what you're looking at there, Ron? Last year's.
But yeah, it says that we ended up with, after we amended the budget, because it was like at 410, and then we ended up in the budget. So we ended up at 3.8 million additional dollars. What did we do with that money?
Brent can speak to a big chunk of it, but you remember half the year to fund, not necessarily half the year, but about almost half the year, about 5 months of the salary increase, the 2.5% salary increase for teachers.
Okay.
To fund a portion of the year of that.
Just a portion of the year. So this year we're getting stuck with the whole enchilada then.
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
So that's, yeah. Okay. Okie dokie. All right. Thanks.
Mrs. Robinson.
Well, I definitely agree with Jenny on a lot of her points. I do think that, it would take some time to go through the budget and figure out, are there miscellaneous areas that could be cut that do cobble together and come up with the 4 million that we're talking about here? Certainly the travel budget that Jenny mentioned, that's, good, certainly a good idea. It is only $20,000. It's not a big dent, but it is something. So I'm also interested to hear back from Brent or, Brent's team on, is that possible? But, obviously that answer doesn't have to be given now, but I guess some other things too is like, are there some compromises in the middle of these numbers?
Mm-hmm.
I do think that, a teacher increase or pay increase that we have talked about for so long now, and that, we have felt was very right, especially with what we went through last summer, giving a pay raise. I feel like it's really hard for me to swallow to take that off the table. Even though I totally get all of this, like, I'm not giving pay raises at my office right now. I've frozen some of my own pay. And so, but on the other hand, right now, I don't know a single parent that wouldn't agree that their teacher is one of the most valuable people in their child's life right now. If you want to look at education and how it would play in the stock market, I think right now I'd put all my eggs in education, because it's a hot commodity right now, whereas plenty of other companies are losing equity points by the day. So it's hard for me to not highly value, what we're doing, and really see that the biggest investment or the best investment that our community has right now is our school system. And of course, it all ties back to the people that we have operating our schools. So, even if we looked at not doing a 2.5% increase and maybe it was a 1 or a 1.5% increase, would that start to close the gap if we were also looking at, other small miscellaneous items? And I know making that $4 million gap is going to be really, really hard. And so I'm totally going out on a limb, suggesting this, but.
So let's be clear about, I want to be real clear about, we're not, so first of all, to come all the way back, like we presented a budget, the budget we presented, we shared as would be the case even with this one. So if the board approved this or any measures within this, as we watch revenues, if revenues come in under what's anticipated, we'd have to bring, back to you all, here go some options to consider, because we've got to get this thing in line.
Yeah.
Well, even the budget we presented last week, right, or a few weeks before, it was a budget that basically said, hey, here's a balanced budget based on projections and revenues, what we have. And so if the revenues come in under, we're going to have to bring it back and amend it, right? And so obviously it was a decision at that point to press pause and let the county commission give us some guidance, and now we're here, and so at some level it's a matter of the board deciding, whether or not you want, it's either or. There are some absolute unknowns that, I don't know that anybody can answer right now. I mean, who would have ever said we would have had COVID-19, in this particular moment, and it had this impact that it's having.
Well,
I do want to clarify one thing that the pay increase that was given in March, we're not at all proposing that be reduced.
Right.
So that 2.5% is staying steady.
Yep. I'm solely talking about the future 2.5% step increase.
It's not a 2.5% though.
The step increase is equivalent to approximately 1%, but it's 2.8 million.
Got it.
So it's $2.5 million, a little over $2.5 million.
Okay. So maybe it's a half a percent. I mean, and I realize that's not really a lot in the grand scheme of things for a person individually, but it is a good gesture, and it shows our talent that we appreciate them. So, but you know, these are stretch ideas. Like, that's totally what I'm throwing out here, and I recognize that. I also recognize that, you know, it's a stretch that it'll be 0% growth money. It may be 0.1% of growth money, but you know, we got through 9 months of the fiscal year with growth. And so, you know, I'd be surprised if it's just flat 0, but you know, Brent, you're going to know better than I would at this point. But my math says like probably not fully 0%.
Right. And we just don't know until June. A couple of things I want to point out about cuts to the budget. So budget document 3, and I sent the revised one, shows we've cut $6 million budget already. We had already cut $6 million in what we presented to you on the 30th of March. And that's from healthcare savings because of the clinics and the pharmacies. And then we also cut $2 million throughout the budget, throughout a bunch of line items. And we've looked at all those things, like travel, for example. Out of town travel budget is $97,000 for the entire district. So we could cut that out, but it's only $97,000. We could cut 100% of allocations to schools, and it's still not enough to balance the budget. We could cut 100% of our textbook budget, but it's not enough to balance. So all of the areas outside of people, you know, 80% of the budget is people, and 93% of those people are in schools. So it really leaves a very small portion of the budget to cut. And when you're talking about a $3 million decrease in revenue, if we have no local growth, then that's a pretty significant amount without touching people at all. It's, you know, you're talking about not having any materials, no allocations to schools, you know, those sorts of things, because there's certain things we can't cut, like charter school allocations. If we cut transportation, then kids won't come to school. Right. If we cut, we can't really cut utilities. We can't cut lots of those things that we've managed to be as tight as possible. So, and the only other thing I would mention is, with a $417 million budget, we're proposing to cut $3 million expenses and put $1 million in fund balance. The board can always authorize the opposite and take $3 million out of fund balance instead of put $1 million in, like Ms. Hill mentioned, rainy day fund. That's always a way to balance the budget if that is something the board chooses to do.
Mm-hmm. Well, I get it. And I realize that what Jenny and I are both pointing out are merely pennies. But I will say that when it's appropriate, I would like to motion that this board go ahead and just cut our travel budget for the year or for the fiscal year, because we don't need it. And, it would be nice to go to the national convention or wherever, but the reality is we're probably not going to go this year. And so I'd rather you just take that $20,000. And even though it's just a drop in the ocean at the moment, I'd rather you have it to do something with it.
And I'd like to clarify about the rainy day fund. I'm not suggesting that we fund the entirety of this potential shortfall with our rainy day fund. However, I do question: is this the moment where we budget to put another $1 million in, or is this the moment that a rainy day fund is made for, and that we're thankful to have it, but we're not putting money in Mama's bank account right now, to quote the book I read in 5th grade.
So I think you're right. I think one of the things, there are a couple of pieces there, and I want to give Justin, I want to come back to something I think Kathy, you brought up about custodial fees, and I want to be real clear with what we're recommending, because we haven't made any decisions. We're just putting options out there. When we look at big, when you're looking at and I think contextually I need to be clear too. So when you talk about 4 million, 6 million, when you talk about that in the scheme of a budget, in particular, a large organization, you're 80. Most large organizations are 80+% people, and so once you start making any type of cuts, if you try to have as little impact as possible on the people, and I'm talking like job losses and furloughs and things like that, then you try to cut as many things as possible, and you try not to take anybody backwards. So that's some of what we're up against when we start to look at our budget, just from the standpoint of being tight. So one of the things that was out there was the fact that we had budgeted, another several $100,000 for custodial services. And so absolutely with an RFP, and Justin, and that's a conversation the board can say, oh no, we want you to go forward with an RFP. We just need to be prepared that we couldn't pay them any more money than we had budgeted within there. So that's definitely something that's on the that's on the dock as far as consideration for you all as a board. But I think from the standpoint of rainy day, it's really a matter of looking at revenue and projections and the uncertainty that exists right now. There is absolutely uncertainty. We try to present a budget based on our best insight and our best information. And obviously anticipation, thought there was going to be a resolution or something to that effect at the county commission level. And so we are back in here at this particular moment, and these are all options that exist, and so for the board's consideration.
Dr. Johnson, if I can just build off the ABM again, we're tasked to take a look at the budget and where we can make some adjustments. Again, back to the 80% people, two of our biggest contracts in the district are transportation and custodial services. You remember, 18 months or so ago, went through an RFP for custodial for transportation, and went with a new vendor that cost $1 million more than the previous vendor. Custodial services, we budgeted an anticipated increase of, Brent, you'll have to help me with the exact number, but it was somewhere around $500,000 or $600,000. And that's not us just coming up with a number. It's us looking at, what we would be paying employees, what people would come in. We had already talked to some other people that are working with other vendors to come up with a realistic number of what a new contract would take. This does not say we're not putting out an RFP at some point. What it is saying is from December of 2020 to June 30th of 2000, or actually May 31st of 2021, we would stick with ABM and be able to put an RFP when we have a better understanding of the financial landscape, and if we have the money to put out an RFP, because it would be naive of us to think that a new vendor is not going to cost more money. And again, let me point out, this is not a decision that I'm making or that I want to make. It's trying to figure out where we find big ticket items that can help us get to a zero increase budget.
Mrs. Jones.
So I was wondering, the million that we were going to put, well, that's being recommended to be put back in the rainy day fund, could we not use that for the step increases at a reduced amount?
Maybe Keith could chime in, but the way the step increases work, there's a set scale, and there's a step for each year of service for each grade, and that has been defined. I would ask Keith to chime in on whether or not we could change the amounts, in each step to reduce it to that amount. Okay, and then before he answers that, my second question is: are the step increases, if we don't, say we postpone it or we freeze them until June, and say in June it still doesn't show that we'll have the funding for that, legally, can we not? Are we allowed to legally not provide them with the step increases? Yeah, legally, and Scott could chime in if I'm wrong, but legally everything is subject to funding availability. So I would evaluate starting in June, and then, if June still doesn't look like we could do it, I would look again in July and again in August until we get to a point where we may be able to do it.
Okay. Go ahead, Keith.
To answer your question about can we adjust the step increase?
Correct.
Can you hear me?
We're getting feedback from, can somebody mute? Thank you. Okay, go ahead.
I was just saying, as far as can we adjust the step increases, of course, we can sit down and work through the collaborative conferencing process and, adjust that scale. Maybe the more important question is that would that be something we want to do? Our step increases, as we mentioned earlier, they range all the way from, roughly $350 for the smallest one and somewhere in the $1,200 range for the largest one. And typically those larger increases are for our early year teachers. So realistically, can we do it? Yes, we'd just be sitting down, going through a collaborative conferencing process and determining just exactly what that would look like jointly with HCEA.
Mr. Smith.
Hey, sorry. Say again, what was the cost to purchase the new laptops for our teachers? What was that cost?
So that proposal is to start leasing laptops, teacher laptops, and the cost is $650,000.
Okay.
And so that's for 3,500 laptops, and that would be our payment each year, and then automatically replace the teacher's laptop, every 4 years. So in the past, we haven't had any kind of plan to replace technology for either teachers or students or schools. We've just purchased whenever we had funds, and then, we get into a situation where the technology becomes outdated and not usable. We have a lot of teachers that just have old devices, and this would put us, I told someone the other day, this is one of those cans that we can stop kicking down the road. If we have multiple cans, this is one we can take care of. And, especially as we go into a virtual, we've been doing a virtual learning environment, we may have to do more. I think it's important that teachers have the devices in order to be able to deliver virtual learning. And this puts us on a plan to do that from now on and replace every 4 years.
Yeah, I would agree, Brett. I guess I just wanted to compare, make sure that I understood the figure to do that versus the figure to do step increase. So even if we said we weren't going to do the technology for teachers, that still wouldn't leave us enough to do the step increase. So that's just kind of the question I wanted to answer within my own mind.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to move to Mr. McClendon, but if you want to address something he just said. Okay, go ahead, Tucker.
Hey, Brent, actually probably Keith on this one. So if this plan went through and we froze the step increases, the pay, would teachers still go? So if a teacher is a step 10 this year, they would be going to step 11 in July. Say we don't do a step raise next year for whatever reason, then next July, I guess that'd be July of 2022, would they be a step 13 coming into there? So there'd be a double jump in steps?
Good question.
That would be subject to conferencing, in my opinion.
So
Exactly.
we talked about this. I'm sorry, this is Nakia. We talked about this a little bit in terms of the mechanics. Today, they agreed that we would freeze step increases. So the language freeze would indicate that we would move, if you were on step 10 and step 11, let's say, was supposed to be $300 more, instead, step 11 would be the same dollar amount as step 10. right, for next year. So
Okay.
to your point, once you make that adjustment, come July 2021, when we're moving into a new fiscal year, if we never made any revision to the salary schedule coming out of this year and we weren't able to restore the step, they would move to step 12, but step 12 would essentially look like what the dollar amount would have been for step 11, if that makes sense.
Yeah, gotcha. Brent, do we have any, and this is kind of ties into budget, but kind of curiosity, and we briefly touched on this, I think, last week, what our savings are from, just utility cost and water cost throughout, I guess, since March?
Yeah, I would not say it's significant. I don't have the dollar amount. Justin can add to this, but we'll have some savings from not using the buildings at full capacity. Not air conditioning them as much as we would have, and not having as many lights on, for example. But it's not hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's only been 5 or 6 weeks since the buildings have been kind of closed, and then we'll have some savings in the transportation contracts related to fuel and some different things, but I wouldn't call any of it significant savings.
Gotcha. And then my second question was going into transportation. Our first student increase, is about $550,000 this year?
That's for first student and the independent contractors combined. It's roughly 3% escalator.
Do you know what just first student?
Employee drivers as well.
Gotcha. Do you know what just first student increase is?
I tried to 2.5%, I think, Brent.
It's 3%.
Have we?
It'd be it's about 400,000.
Gotcha. I
think it's around 390.
Have we thought about going to them and seeing what we can do? They haven't been using. We've had students. They've been delivering meals and stuff with buses and stuff, but they haven't been doing all kinds of different things like they would if we were in normal operation. If there was, savings there, depending on what we could do with them. Same with ABM. I'm not sure how much that contract, but I would have to guess that they're not using nearly the supplies, the man hours and stuff like that they would be if we were in school. And if there was any kind of savings for us to get on that end, if we're trying to scrap together a budget, like Jenny said, and I think is in our best interest. If we can find 100,000 here, 100,000 there from contracts like that, the two largest contracts, then I think that's something that we should pursue.
Mr. McClendon, I haven't spoken with First Student. It's on my agenda to speak with them. I have spoken with ABM, and we're in talks with them. They're willing to pass on the 2% increase that's in their yearly contract if the extension goes through the end of the year. So there would be some savings with ABM, and we'll certainly have that conversation with First Student.
Do you know what that 2% equals?
Like $2 million.
It's about the 2% for the custodial escalation is roughly 200,000.
Just to be clear,
let me be clear, Mr. McClendon, on what the proposal is there. So the 2%, if we cut that, it would cut out any not their step increase, but they basically do like a loyalty bonus for employees that have been around for a number of years. So one thing I talked to them about today is if we did away with the entire 2%, they wouldn't be able to pay that to the employees. So what I would recommend we come back to, and this is probably a conversation down the road, is to go to 1%, and 1% would cut out their increase, but would allow them to give basically their increase to the employees.
I guess I just wanted to point out that, even with all these little things that we're talking about, I bet that equals close to 300,000. And, that's 2 positions that we were talking about cutting. So I at least want to just point that out, that even though it's not a big drop in the ocean, or just a drop in the ocean, compared to the whole budget, but like 2 people's livelihoods and 2 people's like roles, if they're, heavy lifters with our learning communities, like that could be really important.
Well,
So I don't know if it
so
really does come out with those numbers, but
a couple of things that I would caution. One is what Scott put in the chat box about expectations for receiving CARES funds is that we would continue paying our contractors as we are able, again, in accordance with current agreements. Also, Scott, my question would be, if we start lowering the amounts of money we pay on current contracts, would that not trigger a need to possibly have to rebid, like transportation, for example?
That's a great question, Mr. Goldberg. I think if you're talking about the escalator clause, under current circumstances, I think we can get by with it. But that's a really good question. At some point, you're changing the material nature of the underlying agreement. But I think that there's widespread understanding both in the comptroller's office at the state level and the U.S. DOE that local boards of education are going to have to make hard decisions. And to the extent that we're negotiating from an existing agreement in good faith with the vendor, who maybe has saved some costs, I think that's permitted under the CARES Act. But the U.S. DOE has been very, very clear that one of the reasons that we receive funding is so that we can keep our contractors' employees off the unemployment lines. That's the intention. We become effectively an extension of the unemployment office.
Makes sense.
Yeah, it was more of what I just wanted to see what the increase were for those contracts. And like Tiffany said, $100,000 from the ABM contract, and if First Student, is willing to shave off a percentage or two, well, that's $100,000 to $200,000. Well, there's either money that you put with that $1 million from the rainy day fund and do step increases in some capacity, or there's the 2 positions from central office. That's kind of where I was going with that, where Tiffany kind of hit the nail on the head for me. So I'm kind of trying to wrap my head around the $1 million and the fund balance. I think there's a part of me that says, let's be fiscally responsible, but then I think there's another part of me that says it's raining, and I don't think we'll ever see another global pandemic, and so how do we use that money? And so that's kind of what I'm struggling with right now is can we do something with what we have? We already have a fund balance that has the money in it that we need for the what we need for the month, the full month, or the 2 months, whatever it is. So that's just what I was thinking. Thanks, Justin and Brent.
Mrs. Lennon, hang on, Tiffany. Mrs. Lennon.
Just to clarify, going back to when Tucker was talking about the step increases, and I might have missed something. Do they lose a step? When you ask that question, Tucker, they don't lose their step if it totally freezes? Nakia, what did you say on that?
Yes, we're saying that freezing, what the technical way that the freezing of the steps happens, since it's tied to kind of your experience level, what would happen to the salary scale is that if I were on step 10, and let's say step 11 would have been a $300 increase, instead step 11 will show up as the same dollar amount as step 10, right? So we end up, every step ends up instead being exactly what the previous step was, like we've had in historical in historical salary scales. Remember, we talked about last year when we made adjustments to our salary scale, we used to freeze step 0 to step 3 was the same dollar amount, right? Like, so in the first 3 years, you didn't get any steps. So what would happen is for this year, the salary schedule would look like every subsequent step would look exactly like the one, before it. So essentially it would be a shifting down, if you will, if you think about it like a ladder.
And one thing to clarify as well, just what we agreed on in collaborative conferencing today and what we have talked about here is we would freeze the steps now, and then evaluate starting June 20th whether or not we can restore. So, you know, if our economic recovery is good, we may be able to restore the steps, you know, at some point during the fiscal year, and then we would go back and revise the scale back, you know, to what it was with a, you know, partial year or a full year, depending on what the revenue looks like.
And I think to Brent's point, we were, just to piggyback off that, the whole conversation about sales tax in particular, where we're now budgeting sales tax in the requested revised budget, totally ignores, I mean, it's a cut. It's ignoring the collections that we received this year that were above what we budgeted originally last year. So I think it was Tiffany who made the comment earlier that, you know, that quote unquote, there may be growth even if it's 0.1%. Right now, this budget that anticipates cutting $3 million from the revenue from the original budget that we projected, that essentially that's $3 million in sales tax revenue. And we've collected more sales tax revenue to the tune of already close to $2 million and change, more than what we're budgeting for next year, which is $80 million, right? So this is, we talk a lot about just comparing budgeted numbers, and we don't talk as much about collections. And I think that's part of what happens at the county government as well. They budget, but nobody ever goes back and looks at collections. But it's been the school district's position that we will under budget our revenue. We make conservative revenue projections, and then our revenue ends up coming above. And I think historically, the county finance has done that differently. They over budget revenue, and then typically it comes in a little below, but they've adjusted for it on the expenditure side, right? So it's a very different conversation when they say that they're maintaining revenues flat versus what they budgeted last year, knowing that they budgeted revenues more aggressively in fiscal year 20 than we did. But right now, we're just following the same tenor because we don't have the nuanced conversations about budgeted versus actual.
Dr. Hollander. You're muted, Coach.
How about now?
There you go.
Okay, thank you. I will say, Dr. Johnson, and administrative team, our people that you have tried to take care of, even if they take some cuts, I think it's very important. Our bus drivers, our custodians, our people, I am just so thankful you put our cafeteria workers to work. And I saw where Amazon's advertising for people, they're going full bust at $20 an hour. If we can't afford to lose these people, and I applaud you guys for trying to keep them on the job. I do think our cuts, and I agree with what Nakia said, that we had a good early January, February. Well, the problem is going to be from the middle of March through the rest of the year. And I hope and pray that it comes higher than we think. But I think we're wise to take prudent conservative steps. But I am thankful that we're maintaining. I know we're going to save some fuel money and things like that for buses, but those people are essential for us for the future. We've got to keep them. Thank you.
Mrs. Robinson, I had your hand up earlier. Did you want to speak?
Oh yeah, I was just gonna pick on Tucker, but I've already put it in the chat box. But he said we'll never see a pandemic again, but he's the youngest one here, so he probably will, but the rest of us won't. So picking on Tucker.
Okay, so Mr. Bennett, I mean, if we don't have any other discussion here, I mean, the proper method to proceed here, would it be to vote between the two current proposals, or we just need to wait on a motion for one proposal or the other and vote on it alone, up or down?
Well, it's the pleasure of the board. You would need a motion to do something.
Yeah.
It could be one proposal or the other, or as the administration has said, the administration has said that these are just ideas. You could even, I suppose, cobble together some sort of hybrid between the two positions in view of the discussion that you all have had.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'd like to make a motion to propose the revised budget that we've been presented with today.
I'll second that. You got a motion and second on the floor, Mr. Chairman.
I see that. All right, Mrs. Thurman. I don't know who was first, but
It doesn't make any difference. I just want to be sure that the county commission, of course, they said they wanted us to come in with no increased budget. This, just to let them know that this is no increase for the county. That we started out and we ended up getting $3 million more additional dollars from the county. If I see this, if I'm remembering this correctly, and so it ended up being $3 million more than we started out with last year. So actually, and they can't give us any less than that. So they're actually giving us what they gave us last year. The growth money is with the state. And I just wanted to be sure everybody's on the same page and everybody understands that.
Mrs. Hill.
I support the spirit of this proposal, but I don't feel like it's quite there yet. I think it's got some rough edges that I would like to better understand offline, just talking directly to Brian, before I can support this. Now give me another week with some sandpaper, give me 4 days with some sandpaper, and I could probably be pretty comfortable. But as we've already kind of thrown the schedule out, so to speak, I'm less concerned with process at this point as making sure that we really get this aligned with our strategic plan.
Mrs. Robinson. Hey, you're muted, Tiffany.
Sorry. So yeah, this has been a good discussion. This is definitely a hard decision. I definitely want to ask my fellow board members to consider us taking out any non-essential items from our own budget. So like our travel piece. I don't even know if that needs to have a vote, but maybe we just instruct Brent to do that. So I would like the other 8 of you to consider that. But then I guess I just want to be clear. So what we're voting on tonight is this revised budget that is a freeze. And we are certainly going to be re-looking at all of this come June at some point. Am I correct in that? Or early July, basically once the numbers are available on the growth amount?
Yeah, I want to be
discussion again.
Yeah, I want to be clear from where we come from. I think you saw in our initial proposal, and even what we did in March. We want to pay our teachers and leaders and staff. Like that's extremely high on our list of priorities. And last fiscal year, we put $16.5 million in employees by way of initially bonuses, but then we were able to come back and implement the 2.5 and are able to sustain the 2.5. To be really clear, our intent was to add to the 2.5 even coming into this year, but obviously revenue is where it is. So we can only speak to what we've done historically and what the board has approved. And I say historically, but what the board has approved in the past. So we did something out of the box when we proposed the 2.5% in February that took effect in March. And this is a similar type of situation where we're looking at revenue. We'd be looking at revenue, bringing that revenue forward based on where it is. And, the moment we feel like it's in a good place, making the recommendation to restore any steps. So absolutely.
Okay. And that is certainly my highest priority as well. And I think that it's the spirit of this board too, to take care of our employees and our teaching staff and make right with what we've talked about doing for so long now. So, okay. Thank you.
Mrs. Thurman.
Yes, Tiffany said something about foregoing our travel. Of course, I haven't gone to the TSBA convention in years. So, Tiffany, I think that's a good idea. We're not going to use it anyway, so it doesn't really bother me. But anyway, I think that's a very good suggestion from Tiffany. It may not be that much, but it is something. So I appreciate that. And also, I'm really torn about this budget for different reasons than Jenny is, but I just still don't think it's a good year to spend all this money on a literacy program for just lots of reasons. But that's just my opinion.
Mr. McClendon.
Keith or Brent, how does freezing the steps affect retirement? for teachers, or does it have any effect on that?
So the impact is going to be that the salary that's going to be viewed over that period of time is not going to be as much as it typically would. I mean, so it's going to affect retirement to some degree. But we're talking 1 year. It may not be, depending on where a teacher happens to be in their career. It may not be I think they look at the high 3 or 5. I'm not sure off the top of my head, but it is going to have some impact depending on their retirement date. Potentially have some impact depending on their retirement date.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
Keith, the veteran teachers are the ones that would have the lower step increase, right? Dollar amount.
Typically, there is a couple of steps in the advanced degree at the upper end that is a pretty significant step increase for those employees.
I mean, I think generally if they count high, I think it's high 5, so it's a highest 5 years of pay. This year may not go to a highest 5 because of $350, for example, but I think the impact on the retirement calculation would be pretty minimal.
It's the highest 5 consecutive average, and it would not be great. I've done it twice, so I understand. But you try to get it as high as you can, and it would impact. It would not be a major impact, but I would hate to see it impact them at all. It's a good question, Tucker.
Yeah, and second, Rhonda and I think Jenny and Tiffany brought it up, the travel. I think, however we need to proceed to get that out of our board travel, throw that back into the big pot and do that. And then also, I think you threw out the number, the entire travel budget was like 97. I don't know if it's smart for us to have employees traveling right now anyway. And so maybe for this year, that's $100,000 that, if we just maybe put a 1 year freeze on employee travel as well, that we can find. I think you get into, especially if they're going to certain states that have higher case counts than we do here in Tennessee.
One point on that is, we are implementing a freeze on spending right now through June 30th. Those are things that we can still prohibit spending on, even if it's in the budget. If there's $100,000 in the budget, and because of freezes or prohibitions on travel, we may only spend $10,000. That difference would go into fund balance at the end of the year, or could be repurposed through an amendment.
Gotcha. And I did want to, Nakia, I saw you made a note that the bonuses that we did last fall, I guess it was the $2,000 or the $2,500 or the $2,000, I can't remember what it was. But those contributed to the highest 5 too. So with those plus those will help kind of offset what you'll see with the freeze on the step increases. Thanks.
Just one point I want to just one thing for board consideration. All this is just yours to consider. We're not our initial budget presentation was what we had really, I think, had looked at based on projections. But one thing I do want to press on is for we without doubt want to. You always want to try to clean up as many of the edges as you can, and every 5,000 here and 10,000 there and 7,000 there does make a huge difference. But it's also important to be really careful. So Brent's done a good job of cleaning up our budget or cleaning up around the edges in large part and pulling a lot of that in, and that's how we got to even some of the numbers we got to in regards to the $6 million. There does become a point where if you do pull apart too many pieces, you start to really impact the entire systems and structure. So the fact that there's $5,000 here or $7,000 there, like pulling too many of those will cause multiple things to crumble. So it's just a point of clarity. That's why when we start looking at what can we shift, what levers can we pull, it was more about the high leverage, high lever things that, you know, have less individual impact on programs and such. So just something for consideration.
Mr. Chairman, call for the question.
Right before we do, I just want to say one thing. I haven't said anything here the whole time pretty much, but it's been good for me to hear Mr. Goldberg, Dr. Johnson, others just say that, you know, if additional revenue does end up coming forward here in the summer months or early fall, that, you know, the first place we're going to look is addressing the step increases. So that's encouraging. And I would hope, and you guys have already mentioned it, I mean, the spirit of this board has been, at least since I've been on this board, to take care of teachers. And I think that the numbers have borne that out over the last 3-4 years. So I am thankful for that. So, all right, Mrs. Ford, so this is a vote to approve this revised budget. We're ready, I think. Sorry, you're on mute. Yes, ma'am.
Sorry. Dr. Hollander?
With the understanding the county has no more input, I agree, yes.
Mrs. Hill?
No.
Mrs. Jones?
Yes.
Mrs. Lennon?
You're muted, Mrs. Lennon.
No.
Mr. McClendon?
Yes.
Mrs. Robinson?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mrs. Thurman?
I'm going to say no, because I just don't think we need to be spending $6 million right now that we don't have to.
Chairman Wingate?
Yes.
Passes 6-4.
6-4. Did we pick one up?
I mean, I'm sorry, 6-3. I'm sorry. I was looking at the wrong X. It's all beginning to run together.
No,
3
not enough coffee.
for sure.
And great.
All right. Do we have any announcements, events, events that we need to talk about? Any announcements before we close?
I have a question though.
Miss Rhonda's got an event, right? Monday.
No, Wednesday I get to go to work. It's
That's
not
what I'm
Monday.
saying. Wednesday's an event.
It's Wednesday. Yes. Yeah. Hallelujah.
Go ahead, Mrs. Jones.
I was wondering, do we have any further updates about proms? I still get calls about proms.
Yeah.
And
Justin, you want to talk about prom?
I don't know if you want to hear from me about proms.
Yeah.
No, so right now, Ms. Jones, the proms are still canceled. We having a hard time seeing a way forward for proms when you consider social distancing and the guidelines that have been put in place. Of course, we put out the 2 proposed schedules for graduations. We've got a couple emails about those, about people concerned about even having graduations. I think it's important that we're clear that those graduations will not happen if we don't have clearance from health department and CDC. But we did put out those 2 schedules for graduation. Right now, the proms are still postponed pending further notice.
okay.
All right. Anything else?
I was just wondering when we'll know more about summer and I guess like in general summer plans. I don't need details, just wondering, like, do we have a date in mind that something might come?
Yeah. So ideally we'll be in position to announce some things in the next week and a half. Kind of the same with East Brainerd. We're narrowing in or zeroing in on viable options, and we'll be in contact with all you to bring those options forward.
Joe, what about childcare? What do we know about that? Any update?
The school-age childcare, we're looking at a plan to open up 25 sites starting June 1st. We don't have the specific sites nailed down. We are going to recommend limiting the number of students at each of those sites. That's the reason we're planning to open up more than typical. Typically, we open up 14 sites.
Yeah.
We averaged last year about 680 students each day throughout those 14 sites. So we'll have a plan like Dr. Johnson said, coming soon. But the plan currently is June 1st with 25 sites.
June 1st, that's what I needed. Thank you.
I have a question too about that.
All right.
In the sites, do we know, like, I guess the amount of students that will go there? And then two, maybe this is a Scott question. I guess legally, is there any type of waivers that these parents will be signing with their children coming to sites where possible exposure could happen because we don't know what's going on in other people's homes?
I have not discussed that with the administration, and I think I'd like to do that and sort of feel out what that looks like. My way of thinking is, first of all, I'm not sure how effective that would be in the first instance. And in the second instance, I think if we are in a situation where the state is telling us we shouldn't open, then we shouldn't open. And third, if the state is giving us guidance to open and we're following that guidance, then I don't really think there's any kind of waiver that we need to really explore. I mean, I think we're all navigating the same water, using good faith and best judgment as we're doing it.
I should have been clear about that as well. Of course, we're gonna follow the guidance. We won't do anything outside of what's allowable, but we've got to start making plans in order to be ready to open. So the June 1st would be a tentative date.
Okay, Mrs. Thurman. Did you have something? You're muted. Okay. All right. Anybody else?
I would just like to say, just on behalf of everybody at Hamilton County, of how you all have stepped up, through the tornado. I just can't believe how, I want to say publicly to Tucker, I saw everything that you did with CSLA at East Brainerd, collecting every single day. Dr. Hollander, I saw what you were doing. It did not go unnoticed. Joe Smith, I saw what you were doing. I saw everybody working all the time. And it was so cool to see the masks that were being made to help our healthcare providers. Hamilton County Schools stepped it up and they are present in the community. And it just is so obvious. I think it's just great to see that presence. And I just want to publicly say I'm so proud of everybody, of everything that you're doing, amidst all the other things that you're doing too for the system. So thank you for all your hard work. It's amazing. Thank you.
Dr. Hollander.
Just real quickly, I want to say, having been a grandpa teacher, like I know Rhonda's done some, Joe's done some, grandpas, grandmas, and parents, I just give you all the accolades I can, because you guys have helped our teachers who have presented the materials, then the adults in the homes have had to carry it out, and I am just so proud of the team effort. So thankful for every single one. Parents, grandparents, everyone, and teachers.
I've expelled my only student, so I'm good.
I had one parent say, I got to tell you this. I had one parent tell me, a former student of mine said, Coach Hollander, my gosh, I used to think it was the teacher's fault. Now I realize it's my kids.
Was that zero tolerance, Rhonda?
Absolutely. Because I was going to kill him. So zero tolerance on my part.
Mrs. Hill. Hey, you're muted, Jenny.
Every budget presentation, I've been chuckling because Brian always shows those big Post-it notes of the vision that the board had when he first came. And one of them is that parents would be more involved than ever in their children's education. And y'all, we have done it.
Yeah, I don't know if it was planned. I don't know if it was planned to happen that way for sure.
That makes me laugh every time I see it.
Yeah, it's happened. Absolutely.
All right. If we don't have anything else, meeting adjourned. Thank you, Sherry.
Thank you.